Welcome to Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. I'm Ron Scholl. Last time on Gas, advocates for Alberton spill victims Lisa Mosca and Hope Seek took their video camera to the state capital of Helena, Montana, to interview Tom Ellerhoff, administrative officer for the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, who had oversight on the Montana spill site remediation. The encounter left them in awe. We now continue with Part 3, Chapter 8, the CAG. By 1998, the ACCEH board solidified into Lucinda Hodges, Deborah Griffin, Beverly Ridenauer, Katina Madge, and Roger Chalmers, with Hodges deemed derailment central, housing the office and managing the files at her Missoula trailer. ACCEH wrote EPA Region 8 Director William Yellowtail and U.S. EPA Director Carol Browner to prod them to reopen the Alberton case. In part, they requested a public meeting with an EPA chemist or toxicologist. The EPA had never held a public meeting to answer concerns or gather public comment, despite 2 years of complaints and requests. Why hadn't the EPA initiated a public meeting as a follow-up to the incident? Chris Weiss: I'm not sure. I certainly don't see anything wrong with that particularly. That's something that our community involvement folks would have done. ACCEH hadn't been informed about community involvement options, and the EPA never brought in a coordinator. Weiss claimed there are some jurisdictional issues too, so for us to hold a public meeting without Ellen Leahy's consent and request would be unusual and possibly inappropriate. Likewise, had the state requested that EPA hold and conduct a public meeting, I think that would have carried lots and lots of weight, he said. The same state that initially stonewalled EPA involvement. To Hodges, it was more passing of a worn buck. No one took residents' complaints as important enough to act upon. ATSDR's Chris Poulet and Glenn Tucker announced a meeting for March 12, 1998 at the Alberton High School to recruit members for a Community Advisory Group, or CAG. The CAG ideally would have a balance of stakeholders and eventually create a Community Needs Assessment Report. ACCEH clarified their reluctance to have the Missoula Health Department participate because, they said, they established very quickly after the evacuation that health complaints in the former hot zone were either a legal problem or a psychological problem, rather than a public health problem. ACCEH asked that the Mineral County Health Department be involved instead. ACCEH touted their achievements, including a fledgling symptom survey, an investigative report, and the archiving of documents. These types of projects were described as goals in the ATSDR Guide on Needs Assessments. Hodges hoped the CAG could help the coalition get funding to fully implement key projects. Most importantly, community members would be in charge of helping themselves. ACCEH wrote a 2-page agenda prior to the ATSDR meeting, emphasizing their goals toward informing the needs assessment. Poulet invited interested area residents to the introductory meeting, including Hodges and a few other officials, including School Board Trustee Gary Weber and the new Mineral County Sanitarian Wayne Marchwick. Not everyone invited claimed chronic illness from the spill. Marchwick hadn't even been in the area, hired in October 1997. Marchwick didn't attend this initial meeting. Lisa Mosca videotaped this and future CAG meetings. A group leader would be chosen by the CAG, though Poulet said the local health official usually chaired it. Members would represent the community and organizations, not themselves, and all viewpoints would be recognized and discussed. Ultimately, the CAG would make agreements based on majority opinion. The CAG should be 10 or so people, Poulet said. Hodges would soon regret her request for Mineral County involvement. The first CAG meeting took place March 23rd at the Alberton High School. Already, Hodges' hopes had plummeted. Prior to the meeting, she got a call from Marchwick, whom she had never met. He called me about the agenda, she said. He said, "This is what we're going to do, etc." And I said, "Excuse me, how do you know we're going to do this? We haven't even had a meeting yet." He was immediately hot-headed. He said, "Well, this is the plan." I said, "There hasn't been community input yet." I realized quickly that we weren't going to have input. He blew up. You don't know what you're talking about. You're not in charge. This is my group. This is my county. That macho crap, Hodges said. She said Marchwick hung up on her. Hodges said Marchwick told her that ATSDR put him in charge, despite that no vote had yet been taken by the CAG, and that he was already working on a grant proposal. He didn't want to hear about any ideas we had, Hodges said. Within 15 minutes, though, Marchwick called back and apologized and said they'd start afresh at the meeting, and Hodges thought he meant it. But prior to the meeting, as Mosca set up her camera and people arrived, Hodges claimed Marchwick verbally attacked her. He said, "Oh, you're the anti-government person who's been writing these letters. I want to let you know that I totally disagree with that. I love my government, and I am a patriot, and I don't like people like you." Hodges said Marchwick called her a communist. Some of this tension played out on tape. Marchwick, Hodges, the Chalmers, the Zymets, Jay Stiles, Paul Manson, Gary Weber, Paris Young, Iris Dalton, Sean Lake, and Dixie Robertson were present. No one from ATSDR. Marchwick admitted he wasn't familiar with the spill except for some of the public record and conceded he needed to be educated. He was a half-time health officer, half-time planner, with a bachelor's degree in environmental biology. He brought up the possibility of a $12,000 grant from NACCHO, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, $6,000 for the CAG's needs assessment, and $6,000 for health or environmental education. NACCHO described the process as an environmental education needs assessment to survey residents about their health concerns and improve environmental health education. The grant deadline was within days. Marchwick admitted he never dealt much with ASTR or ASTDR, he said. Hodges announced she had decided not to stay on the CAG for now, as had Beverly Ridenour, Rick Madge, and the Chalmers. Dealing with ATSDR lately has been a nightmare, she said, and now they had given conflicting information to ACCEH and Marchwick. Marchwick interrupted Hodges, putting down his notebook and kicking back in his chair. He was a tall young man, balding and quick to smile. "You're more than welcome to do that. First of all, there are some people here that feel that government is biased, and I've heard exactly this. You can't trust Missoula County. You can't trust Mineral County government. Nor can you trust the federal government. And I take that personal because I have a lot of passion for my career. I chose this career specifically to help community health as well as environmental health. So I take that personal when someone says I'm biased and I don't do my job. I want that out on the table now. I just want everyone to know that." Marchwick had come with an attitude about Hodges and criticism of government, likely informed by ATSDR or through ACCEH correspondence he'd been given to read. Hodges explained that after all the effort they had made, they felt burned by ATSDR. "When ATSDR is ready to put something on the table in black and white," she said, "the budget, what the CAG can't do, what the CAG can do, I'd be personally willing to come back at that time." Dixie Robertson said ATSDR promised the CAG would be a community group. Marchwick: "You guys can vote whoever you want the project manager. Really, I don't have the time to do it. I put in 50 hours a week as it is." Overworked and unfamiliar with the spill, Marchwick had approached key victim advocates like Hodges as adversaries. "We're the victims," Ada Chalmers reminded Marchwick. Hodges stayed a while to listen to Marchwick discuss the goals of the CAG. He saw a need to look at chronic symptoms and diseases that may be related to exposures, and to see if anything else did spill, he said. Robertson emphasized that ACCEH had collected much information already. Marchwick: "I have 5 boxes in my office, so I have tons of information. The EPA, the state, DEQ, Olympic Scientific, which is the lab doing all the analysis, MRL, tons of information from the Missoula Health Department. I haven't even skimmed the top of it," he said. Yet again, Hodges sighed inwardly, they would have to bring a key official up to speed, someone who knew little about the spill, even the official story, much less the stories of the victims. As Hodges and the Chalmers left the meeting, Hodges said, "The other reason I'm not staying is that I happen to be very sensitive to whatever spilled out here. Just coming out here does affect my health. If the CAG does continue, if you could change your meetings, at least some of them, to a place that doesn't affect people. Maybe Frenchtown," she said. "I go by that site every 3 weeks or a month," Marchwick said. I have to go up that road for inspections. There's definitely an odor there, he acknowledged. 2 years after the spill. In the course of the remaining meeting, a lot of familiar topics came up as people told bits of the Alberton story. There's still a lot of issues that people want to talk about, Roxanne Zyment explained. The meeting was a rare chance to share a few complaints outside the circle of ACCEH members, if informally. There had never been a public critique of the response. So many questions, so many feelings, briefly unbottled. Why does the area still smell? Someone asked. Dixie Robertson complained about DEQ's Tom Ellerhoff. Why wasn't he on this CAG? The conversation turned toward the division within the community. I think the settlement process was very divisive and almost set up to not allow us to have this group interaction, Sean Lake said. The settlements made things worse. Much of the money just went to Missoula, to buy cars, for example, that people later lost. Trying to hold people in Alberton together is like an act of God, Robertson said. MRL pitted neighbor against neighbor. As talk turned to how the CAG would function, Robertson explained that Hodges felt betrayed by ATSDR and didn't want to redo the research they had already accomplished. The whole impetus behind the CAG was victim dissatisfaction. Marchwick suggested co-chairs. He'd be the government side, someone else could represent the community. He could be an advisor. In the end, the fledgling CAG, minus the early walkouts, voted for Marchwick to write the grant proposal. Weber felt Marchwick, Mineral County, should be in charge of funds. Manson nominated Marchwick as project coordinator to be voted on next meeting. Marchwick said he was open to meeting elsewhere. The seminal CAG meeting illustrated the pent-up frustrations of people unable to express their concerns in a public forum. But the anger that had surfaced at the ATSDR meeting in 1997 was absent, though Marchwick nearly succeeded in making himself a new target of frustration, and the small group of CAG members had expectations of helping themselves. But for members of ACCEH, the meeting seemed another setback, the CAG led by someone who, once again, would have to play catch-up. Hodges had wanted ACCEH to have a key role in the CAG, and felt ATSDR misled her about community involvement. The personality conflict didn't help. Marchwick took criticism about government entities as a personal attack, yet he didn't understand what informed that criticism. Hodges claimed Marchwick left a nasty message on her phone after the meeting, and she refused to use him as a liaison with the CAG from then on, only contacting it through Poulet. Hodges said none of the main people who ultimately stayed on the CAG were chronically injured from the spill, and they were all people able to live in Alberton. No one from the Missoula Health Department ever attended a CAG meeting. Leahy didn't feel wanted, while claiming it wasn't Missoula County's responsibility, despite the major transboundary effects of the spill, and said the Missoula Health Department had no resources to offer anyway. The CAG had Marchwick, the lone, overworked resource from tiny Mineral County. At the next CAG meeting in early April, the new group prioritized their concerns with a long and ambitious list, including get or make a registry of those exposed, get results of all studies or a timeline for their release, start their own long-range health study, get comments from people, which could also include a health survey that would also educate people on the symptoms experienced, perhaps as part of a newsletter. Perhaps get a professional expert to consult about the chemicals of concern and health effects, research existing documents on chlorine exposure, look at the environmental contamination, delineate the area of contamination, and look at improving evacuation procedures. What dismayed Hodges was that the CAG started from square one. Marchwick suggested the bulk of the research should be done by hiring someone, perhaps a graduate student, to look at all the files page by page. He budgeted $4,200, at $7 an hour, 600 hours, of the proposed $6,000 grant toward that. This researcher would give monthly reports and a final report, the CAG's needs assessment, by the December 1998 deadline. Marchwick seemed earnestly concerned with the long-term health of the community and examining any chronic problems. But that spring, Hodges thought ACCEH's agenda for the CAG a total flop. Hodges later heard CAGs were a program ATSDR created to satisfy difficult communities. In early April, ACCEH began receiving several complaints of pesticide-like and chemical odors in and around Alberton and renewed complaints of illness, similar to 1997, the spring thaw effect. Jumping through DEQ's hoops, ACCEH wrote Marchwick, explaining that Ellerhoff said to direct complaints to the county health department. They asked Marchwick to investigate and make a written report. They wanted to know if he would conduct air monitoring. He blew us off, Hodges said, nor did he contact DEQ. Wayne said that people would have to tell him, and that us telling him wasn't enough. There would be no more anniversary protests or media coverage. The residents who felt they could no longer live in Alberton because of the spill had already left. When the meetings got ugly, Hodges said, that's when Lisa pushed us to get above the local petty politics level, because it was killing us to deal with that. After witnessing the first CAG meeting, Mosca suggested a road trip to Washington, D.C., which she would help coordinate. Hodges said she pushed for the D.C. trip, that we should reach out more on the federal level, get a higher profile, work more with politicians. I think that without Lisa's help, we might have just disintegrated. The CAG, that was such an ugly time. Mosca arranged a 3-day trip in April to lobby Montana's representatives, especially Democratic Senator Max Baucus, who was on the influential Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Pretty much bust was how Hodges characterized their lobbying effort in D.C. We met with Baucus's aides. They were worthless, she said. They barely seemed to listen. ACCEH gave advance notice to Senator Conrad Burns and Representative Rick Hill's offices, but Hodges and Mosca didn't even get in the door. Nobody had time for them. One thing I do remember, Hodges said, while we were in Baucus's office talking to these aides. They had their internet news feed on the computer, and something came up about the Schleep case. It was the news article about the sanctions against MRL, and they acknowledged it at the time. That did make them a little nervous, she said. Back home, lawsuits were heating up. But the D.C. trip produced encouragement from some non-government sources. Hodges and Mosca visited Citizens Clearinghouse for Hazardous Waste, founded by Lois Gibbs. 1998 was the 20th anniversary of the residents' movement at Love Canal, and the women attended a formal event and film premiere commemorating Love Canal. The next day, they sat with the Mothers of Love Canal, a small group of victims. I got to spend the whole afternoon with them, Hodges said, learning from them, what their strategies were, what they're doing now. Hodges was struck by the women's commitment over 20 years, despite the various losses they absorbed. Gibbs was the only one she met who still had healthy children living, not having birth defects or lost through disease. The mothers also seemed a community in spirit, happy to see each other. And they were managing the medical money for Love Canal, Hodges said, a $20 million insurance fund. The timing of the trip with Love Canal's 20th anniversary had been pure coincidence. Hodges felt it the highlight, engendering hope, unlike the Montana congressional delegation. The timing also presented an opportunity to coordinate the anticipated completion of Mosca's film with an upcoming Love Canal anniversary event on August 2nd. Anniversary organizers encouraged local communities across America to pair up any local events, and that motivated Hodges to also work on a railroad safety petition and ACCEH fundraiser. So that summer, Hodges said, we were working on putting together the film premiere and the fundraiser. Hodges' working relationship with Mosca progressed rapidly. It was all Lisa, she said. It's all her personality, her passion. They formed a personal friendship as well. Ironically, Hodges thanked the inauspicious start to the CAG for jump-starting hopes in new directions. Next time on Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. 26 months after the Alberton chemical spill, ATSDR finally releases the results from their initial health survey. Later that summer, in conjunction with a fundraiser for ACCEH, Hodges releases public information about safety problems on MRL's rail line. Within weeks, her husband is brutally attacked. Until then, this is Ron Scholl. Thanks for listening. This podcast is adapted from the book Gas, the true story of a toxic train derailment. Visit Amazon.com to see the 2-book series. To access support material in the book, such as maps, photos, illustrations, and video links, visit my Facebook page Gas, the true story. or watch my gas playlist on my YouTube channel at RL Scholl.